going to study now a little bit about racism and how it ties in with evolution. When we're done with this, we'll go into communism and how it ties in with evolution. Then we'll go into Nazism and how it ties in. And then into the New World Order and how it ties in. It'll probably take us about the next 55 weeks, but we'll work on it here. Here's the Charles Darwin's book. Notice the title, The Origin of Species. Now, that is not the entire title to the book. We'll get into the whole title in just a minute, okay? But almost all the books, if kids today hear about Charles Darwin's book, they're only told the title was The Origin of Species. One thing you need to know for the quiz is the real title to the book, coming up next. Now, the evolution theory came out way before Charles Darwin in 1859, okay? Charles Darwin's grandfather, Erasmus Darwin, taught the same thing. Erasmus Darwin was a medical doctor. He was so huge they cut out the table to allow a place for his belly while he ate. He had a special table, custom made, cut out just so he could sit there and eat. But he really he rejected God, rejected all sorts of things, and he pretty much wrote most of what Darwin wrote. And many people think that Darwin simply plagiarized or stole the work from his grandfather and claimed it as his own. Never gave Grandpa any credit whatsoever. But Charles Darwin, he came along at an opportune time for this theory to really be acceptable, whereas 60 years earlier, when Grandpa came up with it, people weren't ready to accept it. There were too many strong Christians still, you know, around 1800. So he called it The Origin of Species. Now, you got to be careful when you get into a discussion on creation evolution. The question is not, what is the origin of species? The question is, what is the origin of kinds? The Bible says they bring forth after their kind. It doesn't say they bring forth after their species. For instance, these are all different species of monkeys. But if you stand back and look at it, you should notice one thing. They're all monkeys. It's the same kind of animal, right? I mean, obviously it's not a tomato or a banana or a horse. It's the same kind of animal. Another thing you got to question is, who is deciding what a species is? Who's making this decision anyway? And the evolutionists get all bent out of shape with me because they'll say, we have proven species can be created. I don't question that. Yeah, but have you made a new kind of animal? Like the guy in Indiana. He said, I've got proof for evolution. I said, oh really, what is it? He said, I'm working in the laboratory right now on soybean plants, and we have created soybean plants that are resistant to frost. Totally new species. I said, oh, that'll be handy. I mean, that's good. But what'd you start with? So I had a soybean plant. I said, oh, what do you have now? Soybean plant. I said, I'm sorry, sir. That's not a new kind, okay? So you might have decided it's a new species, and I'm proud of you, but that's not a new kind, okay? It's still a plant. Watch what this textbook does. This is Heath Biology, 91 edition. Darwin published his findings in a book titled On the Origin of Species by Means of Natural Selection. They still don't give the whole title. Now, back in the 1800s, it was very common for the title of your book to be real long. Today we try to make them, you know, short. But they had real long titles back in those days. Here is the title from the title page of Charles Darwin's book. The Origin of Species by Means of Natural Selection, or the Preservation of Favored Races in the Struggle for Life. Who can tell me? You need to know the year this book was published, 1859, for a quiz. When did the American Civil War start? 1861. So what's going on in America in 1859? Slavery, right? So when this book comes out, those people who are for slavery, of course, are thinking, wow, here's a perfect way to justify what we're doing anyway. Darwin is proving scientifically that one race is superior to another. And of course, since I'm white, I know it's the white people. The black people, of course, thought the blacks were superior. The Chinese thought the Chinese were superior. But this book really, now this didn't create racism, okay? But this book coming out in the mid-1800s is like throwing gasoline on a fire. Racism was now justified. Favored races. By the way, back in the Old English spelling, oftentimes they put a U in. Same with the color. The word color, C-O-L-O-U-R, is proper spelling, as is C-O-L-O-R. The U is sometimes in there for so favored races. This is not a misspelling. That's what they called it back then. Now I want to read some of these books. Seven Men Who Rule the World from the Grave, or Fourth Reich of the Rich, great book by Des Griffin, who lives in Oregon. Has written extensively about people who want to, control the world, and how that philosophies have had such a powerful impact. Charles Darwin's book was Origin of Species by Means of Natural Selection or the Preservation of Favored Races. Now, even scientists today, like 1998 Encyclopedia, will say Origin of Species was not addressed in 1859 and is still a mystery in 1998. Both the origin of life and the origin of major groups of animals remains unknown. That's quite a confession. Darwin's book was The Origin of Species, but he never did discuss the origin of species. I don't know why you called it the book that, It's one of the most boring books you ever read. I've got it if you want to try to read the thing. Absolutely boring. The guy's a lousy author, a lousy scientist, lousy thinker, in my humble opinion. Okay. But the idea that there's a favored race, to me, would translate to the fact that we get to become God. You mean I'm the favored race? You mean I'm better than everybody else? Oh. Can you see how this would tie into the same equation? You get to be God. Favored race. Charles Darwin, in his book, showed...
Good morning, good evening, and good afternoon, Africans. Racism. Let's talk about it. Even though it is often thought as a modern problem, racism has deep roots shaped by power, economy, and social hierarchy. It is not a natural human instinct, but a constructed ideology developed over time to justify exploitation and inequality, especially during Europe's age of exploration and empire. In this video, we are going to have a critical analysis of a white clergyman, or rather, I think he's also a professor. And this professor is going to explain to us the origin of racism. I want us to listen to him. I shall get back by the end of the video, where we shall also have a deep, critical analysis. Let's dive in.
His philosophy, he said thus, from the war of nature, from famine and death, the most exalted object we are capable of conceiving, namely the production of higher animals, directly follows. Now tell me, first of all, who's a higher animal?
Humans.
Yeah, I mean this idea of classifying things in an order of this one's the highest animal and this is the lower form of life. For instance, some people will say single-celled creatures like amoeba or paramecium are primitive life forms. There's no such thing as a primitive life form, okay? Actually, they're more complicated, because for my body to do what it does, I have all these different systems. 50 trillion cells, so that I can eat and digest food, breathe, move around, keep the body warm, etc. Other animals do that in one cell. Yeah, that's pretty complicated. So the whole idea that there are primitive life forms and advanced life forms, that whole concept is silly. If it's alive, it's complicated. Incredibly complicated. But Darwin's philosophy was that the way you get these higher animals is through suffering, war, misfits, death, cruelty. This goes back to, reflecting what Malthus taught. Only the strongest really should survive. That's what's best for the species, okay, if the strongest survive. Darwin thought that natives were just advanced animals. Now back in 1859, we had slavery in our country. Racism was popular. It was accepted. It was still wrong, but it was happening. You bought and sold Negroes like slaves. Henry Fairfield Osborn is a name you ought to learn. He was the curator of the American Museum of Natural History. He was one of the guys that was going to come in and testify during the Scopes trial and give evidence for evolution. He said, the standard of intelligence of the average adult Negro is similar to that of the 11-year-old youth of the species Homo sapien. Now, if a teacher said that in class today at the University of West Florida, what would happen?
He'd shot.
He'd certainly be fired and probably shot, right? Oh, Jesse would go get him, wouldn't he? Oh, Jesse Jackson. The guy's a racist. And yet he was one of the strong promoters of evolution back in the 1920s. But most of the museums exist to promote evolution. Many museums were founded by people who believed in evolution and who left behind large chunks of money saying, I want you to start a museum to spread this religion. That's basically what it amounts to. Okay? Thomas Huxley, he's the guy that made Darwin popular. Darwin wrote his book, published it, and went and hid. Huxley went around publicly preaching evolution. Huxley said, no rational man, cognizant of the facts, believes that the average Negro is the equal, still less the superior, of the white man. Now keep in mind, he's saying this back in 1871. Civil War is over, slaves are freed. Did that stop racism? 1960s, we still had trouble in this country. Black people sat on the back of the bus, right? Separate bathrooms, separate schools, you know, segregation. This Priestley said, the black people of Australia, talking about the Aborigines, exactly the same race as the African Negro, cannot take in the gospel. All attempts to bring them to a knowledge of the true God have as yet failed utterly. Poor brutes in human shape, they must perish off the face of the earth like brute beasts. You ever see the movie Quigley Down Under? Mm-hmm. He hired this Quigley guy to come in and shoot Australian Aborigines because he thought they were inferior. They're just an animal. I was out soul winning one night in Longview, Texas. I had a bus route in an all-black neighborhood. For 17 years, I drove a church bus and picked up black kids and brought them to church. Had a wonderful time. Loved it, okay? Many times I'd be out there at midnight, the only white guy in the whole complex, you know. A little nervous once in a while, but hey, I had a wonderful time. Loved it. I've brought thousands and thousands of black people to church and to the Lord, okay? Got them saved. But I'm out there, I couldn't sleep one night, so I got up 2 in the morning, drove down to my bus route to go visiting, because there's always folks up at 2 in the morning in the black neighborhoods, you know. And this one guy was drunk. He was turning his car, thinking he's going down the road, but he drove down the railroad tracks instead. Turned too soon. He drove about 20 feet, and the rails bottomed out, you know, stopped his car, so he's stuck. And the drunk guy's out there trying to figure out, well, how come my car won't move, you know? So I thought, man, a train's going to come and plaster this guy all over the county. So I got out of my car, not on the tracks, and I walked down to help this guy. A couple of other folks stopped, and we went down there and tried to push the guy's car backwards. And I got talking to one of the men who stopped to help, and he said, what are you doing out here? This is a dangerous neighborhood. I said, no, this is my bus route. I come here all the time. I know most of these folks. He said, your bus route? I said, yeah, I drive a bus in here from bringing these folks to church and, you know, tell them about the Lord. He said, these folks are all black. I said, well, not the palms of their hands. He said, black folks don't have souls.
Wow. And that was when?
This was Texas. My kids were little, so 20 years ago. I said, black people don't have souls. I said, are you part of the KKK? He said, yeah, how'd you know? Just a lucky guess, you know. The idea that black people don't have souls is still being taught today, folks. Okay? Racism's not over. Now, Charles Kingsley, was an Anglican priest who promoted Darwin. If it hadn't been for Kingsley talking other Anglican priests and church people into believing in evolution, it probably would have been a dud as a theory. Priestley's the primary guy who got the church people to believing in evolution. So put his name down as a quiz question. Who's the Anglican priest that promoted evolution? The scientists rejected Darwin's idea. You think a people can come from a rock? Yeah, right. Nobody believed that. Priestley got all the church people believing in it. Pretty soon this evolution theory spread around, and Charles Kingsley, I keep saying Priestley, Kingsley was the Anglican priest who promoted this crazy idea. Back in this time, Africans were bought and sold like slaves. They packed them into ships. Here's an example of how they would loose pack them. The ship was allowed to carry 454 slaves. We had 451 on this voyage. On one voyage, she carried 609. Many times, slaves died on the trip. They just chained them to the deck. You didn't get up. You stayed right there for 2 weeks. Got to go to the bathroom? Go ahead. You're staying right here for 2 weeks. Many died. when slavery became illegal or things, sometimes slaving ships would chain them all together, and if they thought they might get caught, bring them up on board, push them overboard, drown them all, just so you don't get caught carrying a cargo of slaves. Here's an example of how they would loose pack them so more would survive. They honestly considered them like cows or sheep. It's just an animal. They thought they didn't have souls. I don't think you'll understand the slavery of the 1800s until you understand how evolution ties in. One more thought and we'll quit. This is from Creation Ex Nihilo magazine. A New South Wales missionary was the horrified witness to the slaughter by mounted police of a group of dozens of Aboriginal men, women, and children. 45 heads were then boiled down, and the 10 best skulls were packed off for overseas. They rounded up the Aborigines, shot them, cut their heads off, boiled them to get rid of all the flesh, and sold the skulls to museums for displays on evolution. The Smithsonian right now, I have heard from very reliable sources, has 33,000 sets of human remains in their basement. Many of the displays that colleges will use as evidence for evolution, the shapes of the skulls being slightly different, you know, are from people that died in the last 200 years. Tasmania, south of Australia, I sat by a guy in the airplane a couple weeks ago from Tasmania. The Tasmanian Aborigines were all slaughtered. There isn't one that survived. The last one was killed in 1908. And they took part of his body and made a tobacco pouch out of it for somebody to carry tobacco. It's unreal what happened. That stuff wouldn't have happened had it not been for the evolution theory. The Bible says all nations are of one blood. And there's no reason to be a racist at all. They thought the Aborigines had not evolved as far, therefore they're just an animal. It's okay to kill them. One of the evidences they used for this was the Aborigines have bigger jawbones. And they said, wow, see, that proves they used to be a monkey. They're closer to monkey than we are. We'll get into that next class, okay? How racism ties in. Then we're going to get into communism, and that's going to be very politically incorrect. You may not want to be here for those next few classes, but see you next week. Thank
you. Now, after clearly listening to this video, here's my deep critical analysis. Remember, by the beginning of the video, I told you that racism is an ideological mindset that was developed with Europeans to try and legitimize or to try and make it okay for oppression and inequality. It was based on economic, politics, and social hierarchy. Yes, here is something that I think you need to know. The origin of racism can be traced to the 15th and 16th centuries during European expansion, particularly the transatlantic slave trade. As European powers began colonizing America and the African continent, Asia as well, they encountered people with different skin colors, cultures, and religions. To justify the violent conquest, enslavement, and resource extraction from these regions, European thinkers and elites developed ideas that categorized non-Europeans as inferior. Africans were especially targeted with the theories suggesting they were biologically and intellectually less than the Europeans who were the whites. These ideas laid the foundation of scientific racism, a false belief or rather a false belief system that used distorted science to rank humans based on race. And I'm here to tell you one thing. According to the taxonomy units, according to the human taxonomy hierarchy, or if you like it, all human beings belongs to the same species, right? The lowest taxonomic unit is the species. What is the species? The species are a group of organisms whose members can freely interbreed and give rise to viable offsprings. This means that these offsprings can be able to give birth, and their offsprings can be able to give birth, and their offsprings can be able to give birth, right? So once you understand racism, we understand racism in a point that even science itself was distorted to fit the narrative, because science itself tries to be rational as rationalism can take it so far, right? We know that science relies on rationalism and empiricism. Rationalism is arriving to the truth using logic and thinking. Empiricism is arriving to the truth using experience, using the sense, using our sight, our nose, our taste, our ears, and our touch. That is how we acquire information using experience, right? Or rather, we get experience through this, right? So, racism itself even distorted the very foundation of education that we thought could not be extorted. Therefore, I personally believe there is nothing in science, or rather, some of the things in science should be questioned. They might be as true, they might not be true as we thought. Now, religion also played a role. European Christians often portrayed Africans as heathens or cursed, using biblical stories like the curse of Ham to legitimize slavery and segregation. Over time, these beliefs became embedded in laws, economics, and institutions. By the 18th and the 19th century, racism had become a central justification for slavery, colonialism, and segregation. It was used to maintain the social and economic dominance of the white people in Europe and settler colonies like the USA. Even after slavery was abolished, racist ideologies continued through Jim Crow laws, apartheid, and modern systemic discrimination. To conclude, racism is not biology, it's not rooted in biology. Because I just told you, if one race was more than the other, we wouldn't belong in the same species, but we do. So racism is not in biology, but in historical systems of power and greed. It emerged to justify inequality and has evolved to sustain it. Understanding the origin of racism helps Black people, helps white people, helps the entire human race to deeply recognize how it works and how it is embedded in the society, and why, I insist, why it is important in dismantling racism, because it requires understanding not just individual bias, but the structure that keeps it alive. I want to ask you a question. What structures do you think are keeping racism alive up to date? The political structure is, the economic structure is, the social structure is, right? So I would really love you to share your thoughts in the comment section. Tell me what you think about the origin of racism. I'd really love to hear from you. Yes. If you get value from what I do, kindly subscribe, support me on Patreon if you may. I'll surely appreciate. See you in the next one.